Okay, so what we're going to do in this part of the DVD is we're going to learn to make a control object that we're going to use for all the facial work. We're going to build that out of splines. I think we've all seen them around for the most part. What we're going to do is we're going to start with a rectangle. And I'm going to make the rectangle, in this case, we're going to go 10 by 10 units. And I'm just going to zero it in the middle of the screen here. I'm building this currently in the front viewport, so it'd be facing us. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put in a circle object. And let's just give this a radius of 1. And so what we want to do is we want to basically have this object set up so that it has limits and limits to the edge of the box and won't go outside of it. And what we're going to use this then for is a UI item so that we can actually control morphs on sort of a 2D basis. So we can have left to right and up and down and be able to control multiple morphs at the same time just by moving this around. We'll then have multiple of these built into a UI system for the character so that we can control different elements. So this might be corner of the mouth out, up, and down, and then on the other side. So you could actually have the mouth go around in full circles and whatnot just by moving around one control. So with a circle, what we're going to do is we're going to take it first. I'm just going to hide the grid off. We're going to parent the control up to the rectangle, and I'm just going to start it in the center. So I'm going to go into screen space, or sorry, parent space, and make sure we're at 0, 0. So anywhere now we are moving the master control, the actual circle in the middle is going to be set at 0, 0, 0 no matter where it is because it's parented to it and aligned to it. And one of the things in Max 7 is being able to limit an object's movement, any tracking animation. In Max 8 there's a new limit controller which will allow you to do this really easily, really quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a great simple way of doing this, and it can be scripted. And what we're going to do is we're going to script this whole thing next and make it look really cool. So what we do for this to actually limit this object's movement is we're going to go into the motion panel, and for the position we're going to change the controller to a position list. And in this case, just in the available track, we're going to put a position script. And we've got an XYZ position script. Now we're leaving the first one active because that's the one we're going to animate on. We could move these around. It wouldn't matter what order they were in, really. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this basically be able to limit the amount of movement here. So we're actually going to have this script controller control this object's XYZ values. Now it's a little bit of a neat trick to do this to get it to work nice and clean. I don't like script controllers personally in Max 7 and previous straight off because they are name dependent. I don't want this to be name dependent. If I suddenly change the names of all these UI controls, let's say I make an entire UI control based out of these and then change the names of them for another set of characters, I would break every single one of the script controllers driving it. So like I've done in previous DVDs, I want to make this name independent by adding a definition to it, a custom attribute definition to it. And the custom attribute definition is going to be relatively simple. It's going to house 4 parameters as the final base of it. I'm just going to start with the 2 basic ones and show you how this is going to work. So I want to call it def equals attributes, and we're going to call this clamp. And again, if you notice, I'm handwriting it, not using the built-in tool for this, so that I get exactly what I want, exactly how I want. I don't need a UI or anything because we're actually going to add this to a controller, not to an object. It's important to know that custom attributes in Max can be applied to objects, modifiers, materials, the root of the scene, any controller, any Max object it can be actually added to. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to have 2 parameters, x and y. So we're going to have x, and it's going to be type of float, and we're going to have y, and it's going to be type of float. And oops, I forgot the parameter block. So parameters, clamp P for parameters. There we go. So we've got the attribute definition. We've got the parameter block with two parameters in it. If I evaluate this with a Control E, just open the listener. I should get an attribute definition returned to me. So now that I know I've got that, what I need to do is I need to get the script controller, the path to it, and add it. So cust attributes dot add, and what do I want to add it to? I want to add it to the second controller in the position list. So let's find it. $.position dot controller. If I just evaluate that, that will return the position list. The second controller in the list will be the position script. And I need the actual node that it's on, and that's going to be the controller itself. So there's the actual position script controller. And then I need to list the definition, def. So custom attributes.add to this controller. I want to add this definition. So if I evaluate that, it comes up true. And if you open up the position list now, you can see there's actually a clamp custom attribute in there with an XY value. Now the way I'm going to get this to work, and the reason I'm doing this and adding this to the position script, is that we're going to make this completely name dependent. If I had to actually call back on itself, I may even get a loop problem with the position script. I may actually end up with a dependency loop sort of thing if I was calling on itself, because this currently sits on this object, and if I called on that object, I could actually get errors and whatnot. This way I'm going to get it around entirely. I'm going to get around the name dependency and everything. So what you do in a script then is you use this and this dot x on this dot x on the script controller will return that channel there. This referring to itself, the controller itself, and dot x, the new parameter that's been added to it. You could actually, the long form would be this dot clamp dot x, but you can actually bypass that the clamp entirely, and just say this dot x. Not quite ready for it yet. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the controllers, the x and y controllers that are on the circle, and I'm going to instance them into these two parameters here. Knowing that I can get access to them directly in the script controller means that I can now control the x and y here. I can control directly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the track view, and with a circle, and I'm going to say copy, and just need to go down and find the position script clamp. There's the x, paste, instance, and take the y position, copy, paste instance. And now what I've actually got is the values of these two controllers are actually one and the same, and they are, when one changes, the other one changes. So if I control this track here, I'm actually controlling this track. I'm just going to close this down for now, just minimize it. So now what we can do in here is we can actually start writing our script. I'm going to say x equals, and just make this a little shorter, this dot x. We'll actually return this and say print x, and evaluate. You can see it's returning 0, and it's actually returning the value currently of the object as it moves side to side. So there's the basic way you get access to it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go a little bit further with this. We're going to say x equals 0, because there's actually a little trick that we have to get around as well, and y equals 0 to start with. And next what we're going to do is we're going to say if this dot x is greater than 5, and it's 5 because this is currently 10 units across and down. That means that it can't travel any more than 5 units off center before it should hit the edge. Then and else. We actually don't need the else statement in this case at all. Just used to writing them. So we're going to say if this dot x is greater than 5, then this dot x equals 5. And evaluate. Now what you'll find, this is kind of neat, because what it's going to do is, if I go one way now, you can see I can go outside of the box. The other way, I can go outside of the box. As soon as I let go of it, it wants to snap back to the edge of the box again. So it isn't 100% sort of real time. Right now it's set up so that it is actually happening and snapping back to the position when you let it go, which isn't so bad. You could actually stop here, and it's kind of user-friendly still. However, it might feel a little odd to the animator that as they crank it up higher, that they can keep pulling it, but it wants to snap back. So what we can do is we can do a little bit of a cheat. What we're going to do is we're going to cheat this in the sense that we're going to drive this value here that's actually being pumped out by the script controller, because right now the script controller is just returning 0, 0, 0 for position x, y, z. What we're going to do is we're going to say x is equal to 0, and if I go past this point and I keep pulling it, pull it back for me. Actually pull it right back, and you'll see that I can't actually go outside of it anymore. And so what we're going to say is x. So this is equal to x, and currently that's just 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to extend our then part of the expression, and I'm going to extend it in front, actually, because that's kind of where it needs to be. I'm going to tell it that if it actually does go outside of a value of 5, then let's set this x value to be 5, or negative 5, or 5, sorry, and pull it back basically. So we're going to say x equals this dot x plus 5. I want to put a semicolon in there. I want to write this all in one line. The semicolon is kind of like a line break, so it'll break down to the next line. Just evaluate that. What you'll find now is it stops in the line, because what's happening is once it gets past this point, I'm just going to say print x. You can see that x is 0, and then as soon as I get to the edge, it's locking it off. It's not allowing it to happen, and it's pushing it back basically. And the reason it's negative this dot x plus 5 is so that it doesn't suddenly snap it back to the center. So I'm taking whatever value this control is, and I'm subtracting it from 5 and getting that outside edge. So now it's hitting the edge, it's locking onto it, it doesn't allow you to push it further. Of course it still goes the other way, so the easy part about this now is I can just simply copy this line, and I can invert that entirely so it works the other way around. Let's see, I think if I just do that and negative 5, and of course this should be the other way around. This should be less than negative 5. I'm having to think about this myself as I do it. There we go. So it locks on the other side as well now. So now I've got it going for one way. If it gets greater than, it stops. If it goes less than negative 5, it stops and hits the edge. And now again, I just need to copy both these lines and just simply change it up for y-axis. So simply just go through and change all the x's to y's, and we should have a completed setup for locking this out. And of course we need to add y in here and evaluate, and now you can actually see that it won't go above, won't go below, and it's stuck on the edges. Now the one thing about our current setup is that's great, but as soon as somebody goes along and says, well, I actually want this to go to a different value, and I want this to be a bigger size, well, unfortunately it doesn't take that into account. It's still only stopping at this given value. So what we're going to do is we're going to update our definition here, and we're going to add to it a bit. I'm going to say redefine def. Just remove the def out of here so that when I evaluate this again, it will update def, because def right now returns that definition. So in here now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 more parameters. Those 2 parameters are going to be length and width. So real simple, I'm going to go L and W, and they're both going to be float values as well, so I'll just copy that in there. redefine those, and I should be able to take a look at the clamp now there, and you can see I now have L and W and X and Y in there. And now what I need to do is I actually need to set it up so that they're hooked up to the length and width parameters of the actual rectangle. So again, let's go back to here, and we're just going to just select both in here. Let's push this over so we can see it a bit better. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab the rectangle object, and if I want to go and copy the controller off here, you notice copy is actually grayed out. It's because there's no controller currently on the length and width. It's would be added automatically if we animated it, or we can just go into assign controller on both of them and say Bezier float. So now they both have controllers. I can say copy, so length, paste instance, copy, paste instance, and now I have instanced values for those as well. So now all I need to do is just go into and do the same thing. I just need to update this piece of code with the W values, and W values actually have to be divided by 2 for all intents and purposes, because W value currently right now, or the length and width values are 10 and 10. We need really 5 and 5 because we're going to replace this value here. So what we're going to do is say L equals this dot L divide by 2. An exact same thing for W. And I'm just going to say W and W. Oops. And now those should actually return the length and width of this divided by 2. Let's just test it by saying print L. And you can see it's reading 2.45. Let's actually set it back to a known value, something correct, and we can see it returns 5. So it's actually returning the existing values that we need. And so I'm going to replace for the width. I'm going to replace all the X values because that's side to side. So I'm going to say not X values, sorry, 5 values, and I just did the wrong one there. Width and width and width and width. Evaluate, make sure it works. And what I should actually have now, which is kind of cool, is if I go in and set this up and then decide to change the width of it, you can see as I pull it down, it's actually pulling the circle in with it. It won't allow it to go outside of it. So I can even change it up to a completely new value now, and it'll always reach that edge and not go any further. Same thing now with the Y. Anytime it says 5 in the Y, I'm going to stick an L instead. L may have been a bad choice because it kind of looks like a 1, but it's actually not. I wish that MaxScript used a different font or something. And now same thing, it doesn't go any higher, and if we actually change it and pull it down, you can actually see that I can completely adjust where it is just by adjusting this, which is nice now because now we can take this simple square shaped control object that's controlling it in this fashion, and we can actually lock it out to maybe a narrow up and down one just by taking it down to 0.01 and have this control that only just goes up and down. And now it'll actually only go up and down, won't travel side to side a whole lot, and just hook up to the y-axis to this. So this control object now, we can simply wire or expression or anything we need, reaction managers, up to the X and Y position values of this control object, and it'll now control it. For the last touch to make it just sort of a little bit more usable, we're just going to take a text object, and we can name it whatever we name it. For whatever part of the character it's going to need to be named for. And again, we can just simply parent that up to the control. And that is essentially the basis of setting up a control. What we're going to do next is we're going to script this control so that we can build these quickly. Now what's nice though still about this system is because we've used the custom attributes on the script controller and we have instance controllers to it, it actually doesn't need to be rebuilt every time. You don't need to go through this process. If I actually shift copy this, this control completely functions as it should on the new control. It's still connected to the values as you'd expect it to be. Because it's all instance controllers, everything copies perfectly. So you can actually now just go around, copy this, change the text to whatever you need it to be, and you've got a new control object, and you can place it in your scene however you want and size it up to however you need it to be sized for. Just to show what's possible, I'm going to show you a script that I've written relatively quickly that actually builds one of these control systems for you just by evaluating it. It's currently written as a function, and it's called facial control. And if I evaluate that, I get a whole new facial control system built. I'm just going to grab, sorry, I've got one on top of the other here. So it's right here. I'll just run it again so you see it actually run. And there's the whole system running. Because this isn't a scripting DVD, I'm not going to get into writing this specifically and explaining every portion of it, but I'm just going to break down quickly how it all works. First off, I've written it as a function, so I can easily call it from the command line just by typing facial control, open close parentheses. It'll build one for me. Building objects in MaxScript is dead simple. A rectangle is rectangle, length, width, the name, and in this case I'm using a command called unique name, which makes sure that the name that's applied to it's unique, by putting a 01, 02, 03 after it. I'm color coding them, the wire color by default, so they come up as, in this case, blue for the rectangle, red for the circle. Parenting the circle to it, rotating it up, because when you first build it, it'll be laying flat on the world plane, and I want to rotate it up so it faces the front viewport. Locking transforms on the circle itself so that it can't move on the Z-axis side to side, or front and back, sorry. Adding list controllers and script controllers. This section here basically builds the custom attribute definition that we're using and adds it to the script controller. This is where the script controller is currently be added, and I've just simply made a variable called scconn, which is holding the script controller, and I can add the custom attribute to the script controller, and there's the definition again. So just as we hand wrote it. Need to do a bit of controller work here for instancing the controllers over, and what I'm doing is I'm simply setting again. I've got the SC1L, it's not a 1 by the way, controller, and that's the one that's on the script controller. And I'm also setting the controller for the length, because remember we had to set the actual controller on the length before we could copy it over. And I'm setting those to a Bezier float, and I'm doing them all at once, so I can actually say this controller equals this controller, which equals this controller, and basically they all become equal to the same. I'm then setting it, 'cause as soon as you add this controller, unfortunately the rectangle pops down to a value of 0, and so I'm having to set the value to a value of 10. So in this case I'm actually just setting the custom attribute property, and it's automatically propagating to the length property in the actual rectangle because they're instanced. Same thing with the width, and then I'm instancing the again I'm setting controllers on the position X and Y and onto the custom attributes that need to be instanced to as well, setting those all at once. So there's the setup of all the controllers. I have the script pre-written in here as a string. You can see the quotes around it, and the word script just becomes a variable. And I'm taking the script controller .script, which is how you add the actual script to the script controller, and adding it to it. Bang! It's there you go. There's a really fast, simple way. The only thing I need to add now is the text object, which is just as easy. I can easily access the text object, its size, properties, and what the actual text is of it, and place it above it. So now you can have ones that are really easy to make. You can actually just run it. You don't even necessarily have to instance it, and you can just run it again, and there it is. So from file to file, you can make them as fast as that now. I'm going to include this script with it so you actually have this. Once again, the only thing that would probably change in this whole thing is that we don't need, basically from about here down, and it would change slightly because all of this is just to try and limit the motion of this control. And in Max 8, we actually have a limit controller to handle that, and we'd just be adding the limit controller to the X and Y values and setting their max and min values to be that of the actual rectangle. And it would actually be a lot less lines. It'd probably only be a few more lines to set it up this way. There's a basic breakdown of script and how important it can be at saving time for rebuilding things and redoing things that you're going to be doing over and over again.